A warm welcome to the panel, Implementing Privacy by Design into Mobile Development. And we will talk about obstacles and opportunities. We set up this panel in the context of the AppPETs project, where we realized that it's often not so easy to integrate privacy by design for many mobile application developers, and where we try to build a library where developers can easily integrate privacy-enhancing technologies. You also have I won't talk too much about the project because you have a sheet of paper in your conference bag, just to remind you to have a look on it afterwards. Now I want to focus on the panel and on a productive discussion. My name is Guagnin. I'm working in a privacy consultancy, where we're also part of this research project. And to my left, there is Veronica Buer from Datatilsynet, the Norway Data Protection Authority. And they also developed guidelines for developers to integrate privacy-enhancing technologies into their software and stuff. And then we have Vesa-Matti Hartikainen, who is working at Jolla, a mobile operating system which is not Google and not Apple, and trying to be more privacy friendly, let's say. And we will learn how in which ways they manage to do it. And then Martin Lopatka from Mozilla. He works on the other side from the ecosystem, not on the mobile developments, but on the server side, because the server always is an important entity. And he will talk about how they manage to do privacy-preserving services and do optimization as well. And then Wulf Bolte, who will talk about the AppPETs perspective, about how he works at mediaTest Digital, where they check mobile applications for security flaws. And clause, maybe that's the wrong saying, yeah. And Seda will moderate the session. You might know her. She does research on privacy perceptions of developers and privacy paradigms. So open the floor to Seda, who will talk a bit about privacy enhancing technologies.
Right. So thank you, Daniel, and thank you everybody for coming here. It is the afternoon. You might have a dip, to take a deep breath occasionally. All right, so this panel focuses on a very, very particular question, namely whether GDPR's requirement for data protection by design leads to adoption of privacy-enhancing technologies. Now, what I mean by privacy-enhancing technologies, I'm going to keep it somewhat narrow and say those are technologies that can provide functionality, the desired functionality, while using cryptographic and other design and architecture decisions or designs to minimize the collection, centralization, replication, and further dissemination of data, while avoiding a single point of failure. And avoiding a single point of failure means avoiding putting the data and responsibility to protect it in the hands of a single entity. So to give you an example of how privacy-enhancing technologies can be used, in a previous paper, my co-authors Carmela Troncoso and Claudia Diaz gave the example of building a road tolling system. So imagine that we would not have let's say in the US, in the European context, road systems paid through tax money, but we had toll systems, so you had to pay as you drive kind of situation. Ideally, we would not want that, but let's say we got there. A straightforward way to make such a system is to put onboard units on all the vehicles, collect every one of these vehicles' location data in a centralized entity. Then the centralized entity would calculate a bill based on the usage of roads at given rates, and then send the bills to the customers. Another option is to enable this billing, but keep the location data in the car or in the vehicle, so on the onboard unit, calculate the bill again on the onboard unit, keep the location data within the vehicle, do not send it to a centralized entity, ensure that the user cannot manipulate the location or the usage of the road's data by using encryption and other design methods, and only send the billing number to a centralized entity. As you can see in such a design, the location data is collected, so the whole system collects the location data, but the location data remains only on the vehicles and can be open to scrutiny when there's concern for fraud. Such a design is a classical example of using privacy-enhancing technologies. It minimizes data centralization, so there's no central entity that has everybody's location. As a result, it reduces privacy risks, and it avoids a single point of failure for data protection. So, given this example, the question is, once again, does the GDPR requirement for privacy by design or data protection by design lead to deployment of such privacy-enhancing technologies? What obstacles are in the way of adopting and deploying pets for developers, and what are some market mechanisms that we can use to promote pets? So that's a kind of overview. The rest of it is going to be a bit of a show. We're going to make it look very, very natural. Veronica, does the GDPR demand of technical solutions for data protection by design lead to the deployment of pets?
Oh. Okay. Privacy enhancing technology distinguish themselves from data protection by design and by default, a technology with data protection by design and by default, in the way that pets are implemented into already existing systems or solution or technology. If we get data protection by design and by default in all technology and solutions, we have no need for pets. And before GDPR was implemented, data protection by design and by default was voluntary. With GDPR in force, data protection by design and by default is mandatory. So, GDPR does not say a word about pet. Instead, we have Article 25, a requirement of data protection by design and by default. But in Norway, and I think as well in your country, we have old system. And I said that pet is in a bit cancelled, but as well as we have this old system from before GDPR was implemented, they are still going strong in Norway. And these systems belongs often to the public sectors. And these systems are not easy to fix or to rebuild. And therefore, in such cases, I think pets or software will be precious and necessary, because these systems also have to comply with GDPR. GDPR applies regardless of whether you are building a new system or if you have an old system. And all technology, all software, including pet, that process personal data have to be developed with data protection by design and by default. And why? Because the controllers have a requirement to only buy, only develop, and only use system, program, solution, artificial intelligence that has data protection by design and by default. And they also have a requirement to put this into the public tender. And I think if we are going to gain privacy in the future, data protection has to be incorporated into the software. Therefore, the key people for making the digital world more privacy friendly is the developer team. And therefore, adequate knowledge of privacy, data protection by design, and default are needed to build privacy-friendly application. Algorithm for automated decision-making, artificial intelligence application, and so on. And then I shall have a little slides up here. Click, 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 there. In 2017, the Norwegian DPA launched guidelines for software development with data protection by design and by default. And these guidelines are intended for software developers mainly, and for controllers procuring software. The guidelines describe how to incorporate data protection principles, the data subject's rights and freedoms, and the obligation of the controller into every step of the development process. Both technical and organizational measures are included, and it reminds us that the most privacy-friendly option has to be default, and that we only are going to process personal data that is necessary for the purpose. These guidelines are a supplement to the company's already existing development methodology. And it is obvious that the developing companies have to have developing methodology. The circle is a symbol for software developing with data protection by design and by default, and shows a circle, a continuous process. So if your methodology have fewer or more steps, you can put the activities into the step where it belongs. To each activity, it is a guideline and a checklist. The guideline gives you a more general overview, while the checklist gives you more technical information. We also think that these guidelines is so specific that they can be the criteria for use in demonstrating compliance when certifying processing activity and get a privacy seal. And as an encouragement, seek to enhance your software, your technology, with a privacy seal. I think that software and technology that have a privacy seal will have a big advantage, because the controller will choose these softwares. And also, you and me, as data subject, will choose technology that has a privacy seal. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we're not only going to get pets, we're also going to get privacy seals. Anybody want to volunteer a response?
Perhaps myself. Thanks for this roundup. I'm Wulf, it was said before. I think when we reach the point that we talk about pets helpful, or will GDPR lead to more pets, this is already too late, because as the example from Seda with the car system, that's actually the way most car sharing systems work, so the bad example shows that the ghost is out of the bottle, right? You can't fix a broken system, and if you reach the point that all companies build their business model on data, and the access to data and the use of data in an unencrypted way, in a plain text way, then you can't implement privacy anymore into this business model. So PETs are a way to fix things, but they won't fix business models. So all companies that are built on these business models are, on the one hand, deprecated, but they are so big that they won't vanish. So these companies will dictate us what we use, and this is the wrong way, I think. We all are aware of the problem of privacy, but may I see hands, how many of you have installed WhatsApp on your smartphones? You understand what I mean? So I think PETs are the wrong way, but I still help to implement them. Perhaps it's one way to make it little bit better, but it's not a solution. And one example is that in Germany we had, before GDPR, we had the BDSG, the German Bundesdatenschutzgesetz, and it was mainly the same. And now everyone is crying because now there's a new law, it has a new name. There's many things are the same, and now many companies are aware that you have to do something about that. The law was there before, but now people are acting. So I think it's still the right time to talk about what should be done for us to build a more privacy-friendly world. But I think PETs are only one step in this area. Thanks.
Martin, would you agree with Wulf?
Yeah, sorry, I would say so. Yeah.
Great. But I mean, what is keeping developers from putting PETs in the world?
Right. So once again, my name is Martin Lopatka. I work at Mozilla as a technical lead of a research engineering team. And I want to thank you all for choosing to come to this panel. I know that we have a lot of really great stuff on the agenda, so yeah, thank you very much. My team spends a lot of time thinking about privacy-enhancing technologies and ways to build intelligent, or at least somewhat clever, web services in a privacy-conscious manner. And that is no easy task. It is a lot harder than doing things sort of without taking privacy into account. The first big challenge that I'd like to mention is organizational buy-in, and this is critical. So it's a different thing to have mandate from the top to build privacy-enhancing technologies, but the people writing the code should also believe that and feel empowered to do that. With building any web service, specifically web services that leverage machine learning technologies where data is a critical part of the product, there are real engineering challenges, system design, implementation, analytics, and these challenges have to be addressed in a privacy-conscious manner in order to build something that is respectful of client privacy in the way that it stores, transmits, and processes data. A proposal, one way of approaching this, perhaps an organizational challenge, to more specifically answer the question, is the absolute need for dedicated roles inside of engineering and product teams who are familiar with the data and accountable for data stewardship. I don't mean necessarily a DPO. I don't think it's fair to ask a DPO to do code review. And I don't think that it's organizationally feasible most of the time to have your code development process looping in data protection officer all the time. So low-level privacy-conscious decisions made by developers should go through a data stewardship review at the engineering level. To take the example of how we operate inside Mozilla, data stewards are individuals in engineering resources or organizations who are familiar with developing technology themselves and review each other's code. There is a transparent process in which data review documentation is produced transparently and published in the repositories of products that ship. The data steward review process that we propose is actually simply verifying for every piece of data that you would like to collect or possibly leverage in terms of your process. It should meet 4 criteria. Necessity, so whether this data collection is actually the minimum necessary data collection to satisfy the need on an engineering level. We refer to that as lean data collection practices. Privacy, so the data collection mechanism that is being built into the service should give users meaningful choices over the way that they control and access their own data. Transparency, the way that we make decisions about data processing and the development of our services should be open and documented in a place where it can be publicly scrutinized and discussed. And finally, accountability. This idea of posting the data review requests in the public repository along with the software, but also communicating about like what the data that we used or collected led to, how it was used in terms of delivering a particular service or product. That's also a critical part of it. I think data collection for the sake of building nice products is something that people can understand. And otherwise, perhaps you shouldn't be collecting particular data if you can't explain why you needed to do so. So in conjunction with that, I think the second challenge that I mentioned is a little bit deviating from strictly engineering, but more engineering management, is this idea of like technical viability and the variability of what is out there in terms of the way that people build services currently. I see that this is something that inhibits real innovation in the space. When engineering teams and engineers look at examples of how people have deployed services, what's out there both in actual applications and in the academic literature are a whole bunch of really great services that have been built under less stringent data control practices than GDPR. And this is what engineers are looking at for inspiration and guidance in the way that they build their products currently. Many companies today have gotten used to this collect everything and then find value later kind of mentality, which just doesn't fly. So I would think that the challenge is to start thinking about data collection as a fundamental part, or privacy in data collection and lean data practices as a fundamental part of the way that we build software. Thank you.
So coming back to Wulf, or do you want to say something, Veronica? Don't let me hold you.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Please go ahead. Please. Yeah.
Oh, Martin, you were so...
Spontaneous.
Yeah, spontaneous. And I think that you are touching a very important data protection principle, data minimization, as well as two other principles, the purpose limitation and the storage limitation. Minimize and limit. The amount of personal data collected and processed should be limited to what is lawful and what is strictly necessary related to the purpose. The personal data shall be deleted when storage is no longer required for the purpose. A good rule of thumb is select before you collect. Select before you collect. Everybody say it? And this is what you have to remember when you are developing in all these activities. The required training, coding, testing, and so on. That's okay?
That was great, Veronica. Wulf, why wouldn't a developer? I mean, we all want to select before we collect, right? What goes wrong?
Well, yes. I think to explain why I say what I will say now, we at mediaTest Digital, we analyze applications and look what privacy and security issues are in there, and then we use this information to deliver it to companies, B2B model, to use this information to decide which applications should be used and which one shouldn't be used. So during this work, we do a lot of static analysis and dynamic analysis and whatnot. What in the end led to the research project AppPETs, why we are here. Because we not only wanted to do finger pointing, but to help to do it the right way. And during our automated analysis, we recognized that most of the time, not the developers are the problem, but the SDKs they use. So especially the big ones, Google, Facebook, and co., they are not delivered with a privacy-aware preset. Ah, okay. Yeah, an SDK is a software development kit. so if you want to build an application, you don't write everything yourself. You use things that are out there, and most developers take, for example, the Google SDK and use all Google services, and so the app is 90% ready before they begin to write a line of code. This is awesome, but this is also the problem, because sorry, everything they do, they just do it until it works, and a normal developer is not privacy aware normally, and so if it works, he stops working on it, and we propose that we don't only need AppPETs or pets at all. We need privacy-aware presets. Google and Facebook say, well, it is possible. You can use our SDK and set up everything so it doesn't collect what you don't need. It just collects what you want if you set it up the right way. But this won't happen. And this is on purpose, I say. These companies want a lot of data because they earn money on these business models on data. And this is why they don't deliver privacy-aware presets. And I think this is something that is a regulatory problem possible to solve. But it's also something where the developers need assistance. They need to know that there is a problem. They need to know that there are other solutions. And they need guidance with examples how it could be done the right way. And these examples should be, in an ideal world, not more complicated than the presets they use at the moment. So we should make the big companies stop to shift the problem to the developers, and we should help the developers to find presets, AppPETs, pets at all, that are privacy aware, and to be able to develop applications that are privacy by default. This is the main problem at the moment, I think.
I'm very concerned about the same. These big companies, and one of the main challenge is that these big companies, they mix 3 different topics in one: the contract, the consent, and the user privilege. And this is both confusing for the data subject, but also wrong compared with the GDPR. A consent is a freely given confirmation based on sufficient information to a given specific purpose. And what and why they need information to that purpose, you have to know. And if and why they need to share this data, that is also what we need to know. It shall be easy for you and for me to read and to understand and to respond and also withdraw our consent. If you can't withdraw your consent, it's not a freely given consent. And I'm also concerned of the labyrinth the data subject has to figure out for limiting their personal setting. And here I think that the data protection authorities have a big work to do, but also the data subject. You and me, we have to claim our rights.
All right. That's great.
Yeah.
We're going to all claim our rights. Good. Okay, so But Vesa-Matti, it seems that you have managed to create something in the world that looks petsy. It has managed to get around the really awful SDK and API settings that are data hungry. But what else are there as obstacles to get pets in the world?
Well, as you heard, there are means how organizations can get these technologies adopted within themselves, and there are good technologies available, and there are companies that are and organizations that are doing good privacy-respecting products. But unfortunately, as we have heard, there are a lot of businesses where the core of the business model is to utilize the data of your customers. So we do need to be aware of this. We need to have the regulation so that the companies that play fairly have a level playing field against the companies that are now in the dominant market position, which are enjoying the current winner takes all type of market. So my experience comes from developing Selfish operating system. It's an independent, privacy-respecting operating system, and obviously we are competing against Google's Android, and it's super difficult to compete against something that is free. So the device vendors do not pay Google for the license of Android. They get it for free, but in turn, Google's services, Google's apps have the default, have the visible position in the front. The default settings come from Android, and this leads to the fact that in fact it's the users that are paying for this operating system with their data and their privacy. And so few of us really comprehensively understand how much data your device collects from your daily life. So this data is then used to profile the users, monetize from the ads on the apps, monetize on the services, monetize on ads on another platform. So like what is collected from your device will impact what you see on your browser. And as the targeted ads are much more efficient than the generic ones, the one who knows the user best gets most bang from the ads. So additionally, it's a troubling trend that consumers seem to be less and less willing to pay for digital goods. They expect to get services for free, they expect to get devices super cheap, and that means that these questionable practices have an upper hand against those that play fairly. These free products are based by ads, in-app purchases, subscriptions, and your data. Even something as simple as buying your television, the television vendor is lowering the TV price by adding apps that track your usage of the TV. It's not all bad news. GDPR has already had some impact on the situation. It severely limits what organizations are legally allowed to do with the data. And more importantly, it is giving us more information what is actually happening. The data subjects are able to get human understandable descriptions of where the data is being used, and that helps a lot. We can of course claim that these big data harvesting organizations do minimal amount to meet the requirements to pass the inspection and so on, but still it's better than nothing. There are fines, there are controls, and they are improving the situation, but of course the progress with these kind of things is always slow. It's not just the GDPR that helps the smaller organizations in these kind of situations. We need to be also aware of these anti-competitive actions. For example, in the mobile operating system space, Google was fined significantly by European Union anti-competitive body. Anyway, you understand what I mean? And it has already led several discussions, for example, to my company that opened up doors that now, since Google needs to loosen up the contracts with the device manufacturers, they are considering again that, hey, maybe it's not Android-only world. So similar actions against the other big players need to be happening for the privacy-respectful companies to get a fair market. So I'm not sure if we need more legislation to address the situation in Europe. GDPR is looking quite good, and the other legislation we already have in place. But we of course need to study what has been the actual impact of it and do some corrective actions, maybe adjust it here and there. And we do need to keep close monitoring that companies are following these legislations, and we should especially focus on the big companies and the companies with dominant market positions and the companies where the network effect is the biggest. So like you, everybody said that you have WhatsApp, so that's...
I haven't.
All right.
Wow. First off, I would like to applaud the efforts going into Sailfish. I think as someone who works at Mozilla, and Mozilla folks know the challenges involved in trying to build a mobile OS. You touched on a lot of really interesting and important points. I'd like to emphasize the importance of market variability for healthy innovation. And as you say, this is not the case in the mobile operating system space currently. This is a topic that's recently been causing myself and many people a lot of concern, as we see it happening in the desktop environment as well, with Microsoft's decision to discontinue development of the Edge HTML web engine in favor of a Chromium-based browser. This decision will mean that also in the desktop browser space, much of the fundamental online infrastructure will be targeting optimal performance on the platform developed by a single company rather than an open web. Didn't want to add too much with regards to the idea of how big players can leverage their market position to sort of bully the little guys. But in preparing for this panel, I came across a really interesting editorial piece by Daniel Oberhaus. If anyone else wants to dig deep into the way that Google's mobile application distribution agreement leads to an ecosystem like we've seen now, I think it's a pretty good read. And I'd like to end on possibly maybe a controversial idea that, in my opinion, GDPR's market impact via corrective actions is only half the story, and I'd love to see more positive incentives, proactive incentives for companies trying to adhere to better standards of data collection and usage. Thanks.
Great. All right. This was our part of the show. Now it's your turn. So I'd like to ask those who have questions. Is there going to be somebody to give the microphone? Great. Yeah, I see quite a few hands. That's great. We have plenty of time, I believe, for discussion. So we'll try to take them one by one. And if we feel like we're getting narrow on time, we'll take multiples. Yes.
Yes, hello. My name is Winfried Tilanes. And I'm wondering if we should not start with noticing that the mobile platforms are extremely hostile when you try to build a privacy-friendly app. Because you can't trust your OS, you can't trust your software development kits. You can even get screwed by third-party applications, like I've been investigating an incident where medical data was leaked by a third-party keyboard who was sending all the information to advertisers. So when we're talking about privacy-enhancing technologies, I really came to the point that I started implementing technologies to protect the app against its platform. So shouldn't we have that perspective here?
All right. Okay. Wulf, do you want to take that on?
Yes, please. Yeah, that's exactly the point I was talking about. Because during the research in the AppPETs project, we recognized that we need to build an SDK that helps developers to get an out-of-the-box privacy experience that is also respecting things like which attacker model is realistic. That we discussed a lot in this research project, which attackers we should address with such an SDK and which are not pointable. And this is also the result of the AppPETs research project, that we try to kick off an idea, host all this stuff on GitHub or GitLab or both, and try to build a community. That is something that is really complicated. We talked about that earlier. Build a community, because we need to get aboard to build these SDKs ourselves, to get the developers something in the hand that helps. So perhaps you look into your bags and browse a little bit through the GitHub repos of the AppPETs project, and look again in a few months, please.
I got another question.
Hi, my name is Philipp Schütz. I've been working for 2 years now for a big company that's actually the IT department of a huge retailer in Germany. And before that, I've been doing a lot of privacy research for 7 years. And it's kind of a déjà vu, because already 8 years ago, we had a lot of talks about privacy-enhancing technologies and how that could be put into practice. What really changed is now we have the GDPR and much more enforcement mechanisms to do that. But in practice, and I can say that from a practical point of view, at least in our company, it's really, really difficult to put these requirements into practice, because we are all, and also public authorities, public departments, dependent on IT services of huge big companies from the US. And actually what they are doing is privacy violation by design, not privacy by design. And that's a huge problem. We really try. Yeah. I mean, I'm working for the data protection unit, and we really try to enforce that, try to work around technical requirements and all that kind of stuff. But it's really, really difficult and almost impossible in a lot of situations. And I'm kind of disappointed at the moment, because I see in practical terms we have these legal requirements on the one hand that are really strict and, in my opinion, also good, but the development is going in a totally different direction, totally different. So what we see is, when we talk about voice recognition, when we talk about data-based models where technology is more and more based on, it's really exactly the opposite. And I'm really thinking about solutions here, and I only come to a point where I see we need kind of competitive IT companies in Europe, competitive also vis-a-vis the American companies who have kind of a different privacy perception, and put that at the core of their product and services. Yeah.
Anybody want to take that from the?
I'm very agree with you. And you can also see the news for last day, I think, Facebook with the Project Atlas. I don't know if you have heard about that. Who gives the teenagers $20 amount for letting them spy on them, what they are texting, what they are saying, what they are searching. It's not good, and I hope that we in Europe and in Norway as well, we are not in Europe and EU, and I hope that the authority and the fines can regulate these big companies. In Norway, we have also started with competition for the most privacy-friendly software and development for the second. This year, this is the second time we have it. I know that Barcelona has also have this competition. Maybe it can lead to more privacy companies. I don't know.
Yeah. In addition to that, if you try, we think a lot with these applications and with this mobile operating systems. So if you take an Android system and strip out all closed source Google services, or you take a Lineage OS or CyanogenMod, formerly known as that, and you strip down all the Google services, there is still a lot of data running to Google. That must be clear. That all the things, the DNS records and the GPS. We talked earlier about the GPS fix software and these things. This is all running through Google servers, and it's nearly impossible to prohibit Google to know something about you if you take your mobile into your hand. And this makes everything a lot harder and more complicated. And if we can do regulations as we want, what happens is that the companies then are forced to use an overseas cloud service, Salesforce or whatever. It won't happen that a development company isn't using something like Slack just because it's not hosted in Europe anymore, because it's GDPR not compliant. So we need to find other ways to protect the web.
Hey, we got.
Go.
So just one quick idea here is that it's correctly pointed out problem there, and I forgot to say that this is maybe a global problem. So European Union alone cannot solve this. So it's similar as global warming. We need to lead by example, but when other big countries come and follow our lead in data protection, then only we can truly get towards solutions.
Yeah.
So,
and just for the microphone, we have two people at the very front, which would also ensure we have a gender balance in the questions. Thank you.
okay, so mobile privacy has been a problem for a decade. It's been a problem since the first iPhone in 2007. And this has been known. It's been known in the industry, and it's been known amongst regulators. So that's just a quick statement. And when we talk about mobile privacy, it's important to talk about those that provide the OS, and then that might be iOS or might be Android. Now, on Android, it becomes even more complicated, because not only do you have Android, which is Google, but then you have the OEM, the Samsungs or the HTCs or others, who also access and take data. That's one thing. And then, in terms of do we need more law? Well, actually, we've had law since 2009 that requires consent for access to any information or for the storage of any information. It doesn't have to be personal data on subscriber terminal equipment. That law is quite clear. You need consent, but we haven't had any regulatory enforcement. So that's another thing. And then in terms of app developers, this has been a problem for a decade. It started with a guy who set up iPhone Home, who discovered that his first iPhone was calling home, the mothership, Apple. So what is it then that developers need that they currently don't have to help them understand that privacy matters and that there are various steps that they can go through to build privacy in? And those of you, by the way, who do have an iPhone, do not think that Apple is, and do not pray at the temple of Apple, because if you go to your settings, privacy, location, and then go to system services, and then go and have a look at the defaults that Apple has automatically set for you in your location system service settings, you might actually be quite shocked. So here we have a case where platforms are actually more powerful and have greater power than the law to either enhance and strengthen or to erode and undermine privacy. So we don't need more law, we need to enforce the laws that we have.
Do any of you guys want to respond to any of that?
Or should we just not?
Just not.
We're all nodding.
Saying like not much to add. I agree with essentially everything you said. In addition, I would say, beside the policy and the enforcement, advocacy and education would play a massive role. If more people heard that message and truly took that to heart, then perhaps we would see a shift in the marketplace.
Let me tell you, I have sat in Facebook office in Palo Alto and Mozilla's office in Palo Alto a decade ago. I've been spreading the message around the world, but it takes ethics, it takes will, it takes commitment, and that hasn't been forthcoming from some of these big companies.
Thanks for your efforts.
First row, please.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to bring a slightly different perspective into discussion because I'm a data protection attorney, and situations that I come across a lot are the ones where my clients, which are big companies, hire development companies to develop apps for them, internal apps that they will use with their own employees. So they're not going to sell them further, just to keep it simple. However, when we look at the privacy by design requirements, they are on the shoulders of the controller. So the company that hires the developer. Now, who and especially how is going to ensure practically, and not on paper, I mean practically, that the privacy by design requirements are actually embedded there? Because what I can do and what the clients, the controllers can do is set up something like a questionnaire, like a list, something like, you need to embed this and that and that. But how can the developers as real persons that you talk to, that call you, can actually do that? How do they know what to build into that app? How do you see this collaboration being more than let's exchange some emails and make it look good? Because I'm interested, and I think everyone should be interested in actually having that working and not just saying, and by the way, this is something that I've seen, a lot of developer companies sell apps that they've already made, and they say, my app is GDPR compliant, here, have it, buy it, pay for it, and use it, because I say it is GDPR compliant, which is obviously zero.
Yeah, actually, this is, oh, sorry.
No, start.
Okay, actually, this was one of the business models we started with. Look into apps and say for the companies that develop this stuff, yeah, it is fine. This is fine here. And this is what we tried to build, sadly enough, on paper through the research project to build into this SDK I was talking about earlier, some kind of monitoring system. Because we don't think that the developer needs the tool, but the user also needs this tool. So if I use an application that talks about privacy, then I have to have a tool in my hand to have a look into the application if it's implemented correctly. So this monitoring and continuous testing should be going until it's on the end device, and every update of the application needs to be tested and verified that it's fine and it's implemented. And this is complicated, but we have an idea how it could work, and we build some proof of concepts. Again, have a look into that, but perhaps you have something to mention in this area too.
Yes. I think we all have the same problem. And I think also that's why we have developed this guidance. Very useful, thank you. Yes, thank you. And I think that the controller, of course, he have to get guarantees from the processor. This have been done in the way with GDPR and data protection by design and by default. And therefore, I think it's very value that you can have so specific requirements in this developing process. Was it good enough for you? Or no? No? Oh.
I'm only wondering about the practicalities of it, because how can I, as a controller, and by the way, the developer might not even be a processor. They might not have any capacity from the point of view of data protection, because they will not have access to the data once the app is completed. Let's take that possibility into account. But I'm still the controller. I am in charge of checking that everything fits my requirements and my obligations. So how do I make it clear to the developer, who is a different entity with different developers, with different mindsets, with their own expertise and their own past and their own ethics in the end? How do I make sure that they do what's right for me?
I can
Maybe you have to document to make a guarantee.
I mean, maybe I can. I mean, like, I'm the moderator.
Come on, Seda.
But okay, so.
So there's no one to tell you to stop.
So I think I can say something. Oh, that's a great idea, Seda. Oh, fantastic. All right, so I've been doing some empirical work speaking with developers, and I think there's a fundamental issue that you're pointing at, which is that for a lot of developers, privacy is securing the data. So if they've secured the data, and if there's a lawyer somewhere in the company that gave them a stamp, they think they're done, right? And the thing that also could help is if there's a firewall, which means that if the data went through the firewall, it's all yours, okay? And it needs to be secured, but the firewall secured it. And encrypt. Yeah, encryption sometimes, and then implementation of encryption is a question, right? Like, yeah, exactly, encryption. So I think you're pointing at something very acutely problematic right now. But I do think that some of the points that were made on the panel that Martin was saying, that not every organization has buy-in, because I've also seen organizations, make a small team that makes it look like there's a privacy policy, and then say, oh, we'll do also data subject access requests. We'll just give them like their name and address back, where there's like a huge database in the background, right? So I think there needs to be buy-in, and it needs to be honest. But I do think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to talk with teams that work with very different methodologies, that is not just tools for management to do a checklist, but for also developers to integrate data protection requirements, which are not the same as privacy requirements. Most pets do not deal with data protection requirements. Like, let's just maybe be honest for a second. And so I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and I hope that this panel is just saying we want to do that work. Yeah.
And maybe we all long for privacy seals. Maybe. Yeah.
All right, yes.
Yeah, just go back maybe to the position of the user or the consumer. Well, there's a lot of discussion about consent or explicit consent as a legal basis. But what about the other grounds? Let's say the legitimate interest of a controller for processing personal data. Well, he is expected to balance his own interests against the interests of the individuals concerned, but I wonder whether they do. But how often is this basis actually being used or being applied vis-a-vis, let's say, a supervisory authority or vis-a-vis someone else?
How often? 3 times. I think it's, I'm not a lawyer, but we are struggle with this in the scientists. Of course we do. I don't know if I have an answer. I'm sorry. Maybe someone else.
Well, yeah. Do you guys have experience with this? Maybe in your companies or in Mozilla?
No, it's just something that we recognized in the wild was that an area in the police needed to have a chat tool, so the policeman stopped working with WhatsApp, and we proposed a good end-to-end encrypted solution, and then the privacy point came into this problem that they needed to be able to protocol the data that is transmitted through this. And it wasn't possible because it was end-to-end encrypted and you need to build a completely new system. So we stopped arguing about the situation and they still use WhatsApp. So this is something where the regulatory solution prohibited the existence of a better setup.
All right.
Okay, I have the mic.
Yeah, great.
I'm lucky.
Well done. Good.
So-
Yeah.
My name is Aurélie Pols. I'm a DPO for a customer data platform called mParticle. I'm that kind of DPO that actually looks at code and asks questions. I bang my head against the wall when it comes to SDKs and the fact that we can't rip them apart and take stuff out. So I understand that, but the discussion we had before made me think about, I would love auditing services, dynamic auditing services of applications, SDKs and things like that. And so my question to mainly Wulf is that what you're proposing? Is that what your company does? And if so, well, I'm interested. So thank you.
Yeah, indeed, this is what we are doing. It's not all possible in an automated way, so it's expensive. But we are trying to automate the stuff that is automatable. And through the research project, we want to open source some of these things. It's complicated, but we can talk about that. But it is a way, and there are other companies who do automated code analysis to get an idea about the quality of the code. But it's never possible to get every problem located through automated systems. So you need a Graphlhawk or something. Yeah. The question was if there's some kind of ranking system. We recognize that in the second where you say this application is good and this not, this is wrong what you say, because it depends on who you are, where you are located, what is your regulatory area, and what is your problem. So our results are transmitted as raw data with a tool to implement a decision-finding system. So you need help to understand what you have to decide. We can't decide for you, and this is something that is for everything. So if you try to understand if the code is good or not, you have at first you have to understand who wrote this and why, and how much time could have been implemented to hide something. Because you can hide code in open source code, that must be clear for everyone. So it's really complicated. But use a lot of tools, go to the Black Hat and talk to hackers. This helps.
Yeah. I'm looking at time. We have 10 more minutes. Is that correct? No, they're going to get their questions. I'm just wondering if we're going to take 2 or 3 questions just to make sure everybody gets their question in. And did you see these people? Are you just cooling down your hand, or you have a question? Okay. Is it right on this topic? Can we take the microphone for a second?
Oh my God.
It's okay. You will get it back. 1 second. If it's a follow-up, we need to get that. Go ahead.
So I'm computer scientist from INRIA. And just to answer your question, there are some free tools that actually help to either statically or dynamically analyze the apps. So one that is static, it's called Exodus Privacy. Maybe you heard about this. So you can go on their website and you say, please analyze this app, and it will tell you all the SDKs that are included there. So this is one tool that anybody can use. And the other one is called Leuven app. So it's built by researchers, computer scientists, that also, the difference is it looks dynamically at what the app is actually sending as it runs. And it's also free to be used if you want to analyze these things.
Okay, conversation later. Conversation later. Microphone goes back to the person who almost gave up. We're going to get that question.
It's okay. I'm Thiago from Tilburg University, and my question is regarding like encryption regulations that have been being constantly discussed, and right now like we have like 5 nations that Australia just implemented an encryption law, and how this might affect the privacy by design principle and implementation. And since we talked about WhatsApps a lot of times here, we know that they use the end-to-end encryption solution, but this also causes some obstacles for the law enforcement. And I mean, what my specific question is, okay, if we come to a moment that they have to build an alternative solution instead of end-to-end encryption, is there already a discussion between developers what could be a proper way of still guaranteeing like data protection rights, privacy rights, at the same time that you can balance this need of like law enforcement agencies?
Who wants to take that one? I mean, I think the developments in Australia are absolutely worrying because it's supposed to be cross-jurisdictional as well. So absolutely good point. And Monique Munn from Australia is in the conference and is an expert on this topic. So grab her for sure to understand the dimensions. One of the things that she did say was that it's not clear how it's going to be enforced. She was recently at our department and she gave a talk. I'm at COSIC. We develop cryptographic solutions. And people were like, okay, so if I push code into a cryptographic protocol that the Australian government has decided is not legal, am I now legally responsible as somebody who contributes to free and open source software? And I think this is very serious questions. The law just went into, became like a thing, I believe, at the end of December. And I think we will see what kind of court challenges will happen. I hope we will see them. And we should talk with Monique Mann. She knows more.
Hello, I work as a legal intern at the Austrian NGO NOIB, and my question is that maybe we didn't discuss that much, is that in the mobile app there are so many actors. Like there was an American case law where basically in an app there were 8 third parties, which like apart from Facebook, other data brokers. And I wouldn't call it third party because they basically collect first party data. And I like the purpose specification principle, but if they can set their own purpose, like they can sell advertising for the app developers, and for that I agree. But then if they can also sell it for their own purpose, like what would it be the perspective of the DPA on this?
Can I see the show of hands of the rest of the questions? We have 5 more minutes. There's one more question. Okay, go. And then we'll take it. And then that will be the last question.
Yeah. What did you?
The question is if an app has integrated multiple third parties.
Yes.
And
the
these third
concept.
parties, they define their
Yes.
own purposes,
Yes.
so not just the purposes of the so-called.
I think that the controller has to regulate this in a contract. So if you have third parties, what I expect as a data subject, and what I give a consent to, I have to know. So if there are third party and fourth parties and fifth parties, I have to know that if I use this application, I give away data to all this, and for this, I have to have enough information about where the information leaks. You have to have, for one specific purpose, a consent to each purpose.
All right. Can we get that last question?
It's more an advice or a kind of recommendation for a paper or a lecture or sort of. A panel from the 35th Chaos Communication Congress from end of last year. It's called How Apps on Android Share Data with Facebook even if you don't have a Facebook account. It's from Privacy International. So if you want to dig deeper into that topic, I can really recommend it. That's it.
Then we not.
I guess we can take one more question. Is there anybody else who you have a question?
Yes.
Oh wait, there's also somebody behind.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Sorry. But we will we will definitely give you a chance to ask your question too. Right.
Okay, thank you to take my question. I'm from Leiden University. I just wondering, when we talk about privacy by default and design, then how's going on children's privacy and data? So do we generalize adults' privacy? Oh, sorry, privacy and data, and between with, I mean, children's privacy and data. So do we need go further for the protection of children's privacy and data, and how to implement, especially on gaming apps? And this is my question. Thank you so much.
Can we, dear crew person, also get your question?
Yeah, of course.
Go ahead.
My question was in line with what Martin said, that we need more overseeing at the developer level. And I think it's pretty hard, because I'm a law student, to translate law and all things that are happening with data we're collecting. And we have a lack of knowledge on the part of the legislator or the law part, and we don't know what really is happening. And how do you think engineers and developers could add something to the law process in order to translate it to other developers and users in a way, for example, like law design that we have seen in other sessions? So that's my question, actually, just the one.
Someone want to do the first one?
Yeah, so we have two questions, and before I give you, I'm going to make a short announcement. There were very many lovely references given by the panelists and by people in the audience. I propose that if you're using Twitter, you announce them by using the hashtag CPDP 2019 and the hashtag AppPETs. It's gone now, so that's A 3 times P and then ETS, right? Like AppPETs.
Organized by
yeah, I think it's still somewhere there. So if you could please put the references you have given also to the panelists. Yeah. If you could tweet them out with AppPETs hashtag. That way we have them all, including the lean method and the data protection authorities method, etc. Okay, now we have two questions: privacy by default for children, and then the translation between law and technology.
I take the children.
Sure, you can take the children.
I take the children. This is also one requirement that you have to implement when you are building software or technology. Of course you have. And then you have to ensure that if it's games or so on, you have to ensure that the people who are gaming or have a load from the parents to play this, or so you have to incorporate it into your software. How to be sure that it is a children or not.
Cool. Very briefly, while we're running the last seconds, thanks for the question. I think one of the things that we've touched on in this panel is this distinction between policy and legal review, and auditing, and technical code review, and what I think we could use more of that we're not seeing is projects. For example, Wulf and I were talking about earlier, projects that take the initiative of verifying that what is expressed in privacy policies and consent forms is actually reflective of what is implemented in the software. The more examples of that we see, I think it can be a capacity building exercise for both the legal side and the technical engineering side, where we start to learn how to speak the same language. And seeing these relationships between what's implemented, how that's behaving in the engineering ecosystem, and what that means for the legal and policy side is really critical, and I would love to see more initiatives like that.
Yeah. This always needs to be a dialogue, because we need to understand what you law people say, and you need to understand what we write there for stuff.
Thanks for your help with the microphone.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the microphone was perfect. Thank you.
I think we saw a lot of nice approaches to bring more privacy into development, and I like the term of privacy violation by design. So we still have a big battle before us. It also became clear that privacy enhancing technologies are only a tool to fix a broken mindset from the past. So yeah, let's keep working on it, and thanks for being here. And yeah, see you later then.